The wedding hall glowed with crystal chandeliers, their reflections dancing across golden walls. Guests murmured in admiration, the air thick with money, power, and the scent of imported roses. Tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of Emily Carter's life. At only 27, pregnant with her first child, she stood in front of the gilded mirror in her bridal suite, adjusting the lace veil her late mother had once dreamed she would wear. Her hands trembled not because of nerves, but because of exhaustion. Carrying Adrian Blackwell's child had drained her body, but her heart was full of hope. She believed she was about to marry the man who promised her forever. But fate had other plans. Minutes before she was meant to walk down the aisle, Emily reached for her phone on the vanity. Instead, she froze. From the half-open door came Adrian's voice, sharp and arrogant, dripping with a truth that sliced through her chest like a blade. "She's perfect for the deal," Adrian muttered into his phone. "Once the ceremony is done, her father's old connections are mine. After that, Emily is nothing more than a pregnant trophy. Vanessa knows her place. She'll always come first." Emily's breath stopped. Her knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of the words. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the poison leaking into her heart. Her fiancé, the billionaire she trusted, wasn't marrying her out of love. It was business. And worse, he admitted another woman, Vanessa, held his true affection. The laughter that followed his words echoed like thunder in her ears. Guests applauded outside, unaware that the bride was suffocating behind a velvet curtain. Her childhood dream shattered in a single phone call. The man who had whispered promises into her hair on sleepless nights, who had kissed her forehead as she battled morning sickness, was nothing but a liar. Emily bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing back sobs that threatened to betray her presence. This was her wedding day. Hundreds of cameras waited to capture her smile, not her tears. Yet the betrayal sliced so deep she couldn't breathe. Images of Adrian holding her hand at doctor appointments flashed through her mind. She remembered the night he whispered, "Our baby will grow up in love, Em." How cruel those words sounded now. She stumbled backward, knocking over a bouquet of white roses. Petals scattered across the marble floor like broken pieces of her heart. She wanted to scream, to tear off the gown, to run far away. But her body froze, paralyzed between rage and despair. And then another sound pierced the silence, the subtle click of heels. From the hallway drifted a woman's laugh. Soft, confident, intimate. Vanessa, she was here, just outside, stepping into the same sacred space meant for the bride. Emily's pulse hammered. The betrayal wasn't a rumor or a suspicion. It was real, unfolding minutes before her vows. Her baby shifted inside her as if sensing her anguish. Tears blurred her vision, but behind them burned something new, fire. The girl who once believed in fairy tales died in that moment. What rose in her place was a woman who would no longer be silent. And as the orchestra began to play the wedding march, Emily wiped her tears, stood tall, and whispered to herself, "They will all remember tonight, but not for the reason Adrian planned." Emily Carter had never asked for a life of luxury. Born in a quiet suburb of Philadelphia, she grew up in a small brick house where her mother worked double shifts as a nurse and her father repaired cars in their driveway, just to keep food on the table. Emily wasn't raised with silk sheets or fancy cars. She was raised with love, sacrifice, and the belief that kindness mattered more than wealth. Her childhood was filled with secondhand dresses, public libraries, and the warmth of neighbors who treated her like family. She had a talent for art and a dream of becoming an event designer, the kind who could transform empty rooms into magical spaces. But after her mother passed away from a sudden illness, Emily put her dreams aside to support her younger sister. At just 19, she became both sister and caretaker, working nights as a waitress while studying design at a community college. She was strong, but quiet about her pain. Those who met her often noticed her gentle smile, unaware of the storms she weathered in silence. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, who brought soup to sick neighbors, who comforted strangers at bus stops. Her generosity made people trust her, and her innocence made her vulnerable. When she first met Adrian Blackwell, she thought fate had finally rewarded her. He was magnetic, confident, and attentive in a way that made her feel like the most important person in the world. He swept her into a life she never imagined. Glittering galas, expensive dinners, promises of security. For the first time since childhood, Emily allowed herself to believe in fairy tales. When she discovered she was pregnant, Emily cried tears of joy. She imagined a future filled with bedtime stories, baby giggles, and family breakfasts. Though Adrian's smiles sometimes felt distant, she convinced herself it was stress from his empire. She carried the weight of the pregnancy mostly alone, but she never complained. She told herself she was building a family, the one she had always dreamed of since losing her mother. Behind closed doors, however, cracks began to show. Adrian's patience grew thin. He snapped at her cravings, mocked her modest clothes, and insisted she present herself better. At events, Emily brushed it off, believing his love was still real. She convinced herself that once the wedding came, everything would change. He would see her not just as his fiancée, but as the mother of his child. She kept giving, sacrificing, and hoping. At 5 months pregnant, she worked tirelessly on the wedding details herself, pouring her heart into designing the perfect night. It wasn't just about impressing guests. It was her way of showing Adrian she was worthy of his world. She chose soft ivory roses to honor her mother, golden candles for warmth, and a string quartet because Adrian once said violins calmed him. Every detail was a love letter. But Emily carried another weight, one far heavier than the lace gown draped across her shoulders. She carried fear. Fear that she wasn't enough. Fear that Adrian's sharp words meant something darker. Fear that the child in her belly would grow up in a cold home, just as she had feared when she lost her mother. Still, she clung to hope. Even in the face of doubt, she whispered to her unborn baby every night, "Daddy loves us. He's just tired. Everything will be better after the wedding." And so on that fateful night, Emily stood in her bridal suite, not as a billionaire's fiancée, but as a woman who had given every piece of herself for love. She was vulnerable, 5 months pregnant, alone in a sea of strangers dressed in diamonds. She had no idea that minutes before walking down the aisle, the fairy tale she built would collapse. Because Emily Carter, the girl who believed love could fix everything, was about to become the woman who would burn it all down. The Crystal Crown Hotel was no ordinary venue. It was the crown jewel of Manhattan, a place where billionaires flaunted their fortunes and politicians whispered secrets behind crystal flutes of champagne. Tonight, its grand ballroom had been transformed into a palace of gold and ivory. Hundreds of candles flickered across towering candelabras, their flames dancing beneath a ceiling painted with constellations. 1,000 white roses perfumed the air, mingling with the scent of aged wine and polished marble. Every detail screamed wealth, power, and control. Adrian Blackwell had spared no expense. The guest list read like a Forbes ranking. CEOs, senators, celebrities, and socialites. A live orchestra played near the stage, their violins weaving a haunting melody that seemed to echo the tension building behind the scenes. Photographers lined the red carpet outside, capturing every sequin and every diamond. To the world, this was the wedding of the year. To Emily, it was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. Guests whispered as they admired the extravagance. "Look at the chandeliers. Those are imported from Venice. I heard the cake cost $50,000. Adrian really knows how to show off." They didn't know the bride was trembling upstairs, her smile fractured by a truth she wasn't ready to reveal. The ballroom buzzed with polite laughter, but beneath the surface, ambition pulsed like a living thing. Men in tailored tuxedos exchanged business cards between bites of caviar. Women in glittering gowns compared diamonds as if they were weapons. Every conversation carried an undertone. Alliances, investments, opportunities. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a transaction wrapped in lace and champagne. At the center of it all stood Adrian, tall and confident, his black tuxedo cut to perfection. He raised his glass to a cluster of investors, his voice smooth as silk. "Tonight is more than a union," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's the promise of legacy." The men laughed and clapped him on the back. To them, Emily wasn't a bride. She was leverage. Meanwhile, Vanessa lingered in the crowd. She wore a crimson gown that clung to her figure, her lips painted to match. Guests mistook her for a guest of honor, unaware she was the very woman Adrian whispered about in secret. Her smirk, held the arrogance of someone who believed she had already won. Above the chaos, Emily stood hidden behind a velvet curtain that overlooked the ballroom from a balcony. Her hands clutched the railing, her heart pounding as she watched Adrian charm the crowd. He looked every inch the billionaire prince, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, playing the perfect groom. But Emily knew the truth now. Every compliment he gave, every toast he raised, was a performance. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "This isn't love, this is theater." The music swelled, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our bride." The crowd erupted in applause, all eyes turning toward the entrance where Emily was supposed to appear. But Emily didn't move. Her veil trembled in her hands. She wasn't just battling fear, she was battling fury. The ballroom waited. The orchestra played louder and whispers spread like wildfire. Where was the bride? The stage was set, the guests restless, Adrian's smile faltering. Emily knew she had only moments to decide: walk into the trap of betrayal, or step into the fire and rewrite the ending herself. And as the music built to a climax, Emily took a deep breath, ready to descend. Not as the obedient bride Adrian expected, but as the storm that would tear his perfect world apart. Adrian Blackwell had spent his entire life learning how to wear masks. To the public, he was the billionaire prodigy, the man who turned risky investments into gold, who smiled on magazine covers, who graced Forbes' list of top 30 under 30 before he was even 30. To the women who adored him, he was the charming gentleman who opened car doors, whispered sweet promises, and showered them with diamond necklaces. But beneath the polish and power, Adrian was a predator. He loved two things: control and appearances. Emily had been the perfect illusion for him. She was beautiful, innocent, and pregnant, symbols of purity that softened his otherwise ruthless reputation. He knew the press would eat it up. Billionaire family man. Investors loved stability, and nothing said stability like a glowing wife and an heir on the way. But Adrian's real passion was standing across the ballroom in a red gown. Vanessa Liu. Vanessa had entered his life less than a year ago as his ambitious assistant. 26, razor sharp, with a smile that could cut glass, she had clawed her way up from obscurity. She wasn't naive like Emily. She was cunning, hungry, and willing to play dirty. Adrian admired that. Where Emily offered devotion, Vanessa offered fire. Where Emily sacrificed, Vanessa demanded, and Adrian loved the chase. He had promised Vanessa more than stolen kisses in limousines. He promised her a future. Once the ink dries on the Carter deal, he had whispered into her hair, "You'll have everything. The money, the company, the world." She believed him. She had to. After all, she had given up her reputation, her career, even her dignity to be with him. Tonight, she stood confidently at the edge of the ballroom, sipping champagne while Emily prepared upstairs. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was the mistress at the groom's wedding, dressed like a queen, not daring anyone to challenge her presence. A few guests raised their brows but said nothing. No one wanted to offend Adrian Blackwell. Adrian himself thrived on the double life. To Emily, he was the devoted fiancé, rehearsing vows he didn't mean. To Vanessa, he was the mastermind, plotting a future without the burden of a wife he secretly mocked. He played both roles effortlessly, switching between them as if changing ties, but his arrogance was his weakness. He believed Emily would never find out. He believed no one could touch him, not with his billions, his influence, his carefully crafted image. That belief blinded him to the storm about to break. As Adrian mingled with politicians and CEOs, his eyes kept drifting to Vanessa. A subtle smirk, a lingering glance, the brush of his hand against hers when no one was looking. It was a dangerous dance, yet he enjoyed the risk. For him, life wasn't about loyalty. It was about winning. And yet, even surrounded by flashing cameras and applause, there was a flicker of fear in Adrian's chest. Not love. Never love. Fear. Fear of exposure. Fear that the mask might slip at the wrong moment. Fear that Emily, sweet, trusting Emily, might be smarter than he gave her credit for. Vanessa leaned in, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "She'll never see it coming," she whispered. Adrian's smirk deepened. He believed her. But what neither of them knew was that Emily had already heard everything. And as Adrian raised his glass in a toast to a future built on lies, the bride upstairs was preparing to destroy the illusion he thought was untouchable. The orchestra swelled, and the ballroom doors opened with a grand flourish. Guests leaned forward in anticipation, cameras flashing as they prepared to capture the perfect image of a billionaire's fairy tale wedding. But instead of Emily walking gracefully down the aisle, silence filled the room. A murmur spread like wildfire. Where was the bride? Adrian's jaw tightened, but he masked it with a smile. He raised his hand, pretending this was all part of the plan. She'll be here, he reassured the crowd. But the seconds stretched into minutes, and the weight of expectation pressed against the golden walls. Then it happened. From the side entrance, Vanessa Liu appeared. Not hidden in the shadows as a discreet guest, not sneaking around as a mistress should. No, she walked boldly into the center of the ballroom in her crimson gown, her chin high, her smile daring. For a heartbeat, no one understood what they were seeing. But then the whispers erupted. Isn't that Adrian's assistant? She looks far too comfortable. Wait, why is she standing next to the groom? Adrian froze. He had not told her to do this. His plan had been control, careful manipulation behind closed doors. Vanessa, however, had her own agenda. She slipped her arm through his with a confidence that sent a shockwave through the crowd. Photographers gasped, cameras clicking furiously. The image of Adrian Blackwell with another woman on his wedding day would travel faster than wildfire. Adrian, Vanessa purred loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. You didn't tell me it would be this beautiful tonight. Her voice carried, sharp and sweet like poisoned honey. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A senator's wife covered her mouth. A business rival smirked with delight. Every guest felt the scandal tightening like a noose. Adrian tried to recover. He laughed stiffly, prying her hand off his arm. Vanessa, what are you doing? He hissed through clenched teeth. But the microphones nearby picked up his words, echoing them across the ballroom. What is going on? One guest whispered. Why would she call him Adrian so casually? Vanessa's smile widened. She loved this, the attention, the chaos, the destruction of Emily's picture-perfect moment. Why pretend, she said softly, but just loud enough for the cameras. Everyone will know soon enough. You promised me tonight. The room erupted. Guests whispered, reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed in a frenzy. Adrian's carefully constructed mask cracked. He forced a smile, trying to laugh it off as a joke, but his eyes darted nervously toward the staircase where Emily was supposed to appear. And then, as if summoned by fate, Emily stepped into view. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, her veil flowing, her eyes red from tears that no one could see under the soft lighting. The entire room gasped, not because she looked broken, but because she looked radiant, powerful even, like a queen walking into battle. Her gaze swept over Adrian and Vanessa, her lips curling into a cold, almost defiant smile. She knew what she had heard, and now everyone else had a glimpse of it too. The silence was deafening. Emily gripped the railing, her belly round beneath the silk gown, her presence undeniable. Every camera turned to her, every whisper died. Adrian reached out a hand, desperate to salvage the moment. Emily, my love, it's not what it looks like. But Emily's eyes locked on his, unblinking. And before the entire ballroom, she spoke her first words of the night. No, Adrian, it's exactly what it looks like. The ballroom still echoed with gasps and whispers as Emily turned away from Adrian's outstretched hand. The orchestra had stopped playing, and the silence pressed in like a heavy curtain. Cameras flashed, capturing her every step as she walked steadily down the staircase, her veil trailing behind her like a banner of defiance. But once the crowd faded and the doors to the bridal suite shut behind her, the weight of it all came crashing down. Emily collapsed against the vanity table, her trembling hands clutching the edge as sobs tore through her chest. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. The bride staring back wasn't the glowing woman she had imagined, but a broken figure with smeared mascara, red eyes and lips trembling with silent grief. She yanked the veil from her head and threw it to the floor, the lace crumpling like the fairy tale she once believed in. Her chest heaved, her breaths shallow. She pressed both palms to her belly, whispering through the sobs, I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. The life inside her shifted, a gentle kick reminding her that she wasn't completely alone. Yet at that moment, loneliness wrapped around her like chains. Memories flooded her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. Adrian's laughter when he first told her he loved her. The nights he held her hair back as she vomited through morning sickness. The promises he made about building a family together. Every moment now twisted into a cruel joke, a performance meant to keep her in place while he pursued another woman. Her sobs turned into anger, a raw sound that shook the room. She grabbed the bouquet of roses from the table and hurled it across the suite, petals exploding across the carpet. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me? To our child?" The walls seemed to close in. The weight of humiliation crushed her. The guests' whispers, the cameras flashing, Vanessa's smirk. She could almost hear them laughing at her, mocking the naive little bride who thought love was enough to hold on to a billionaire. She had walked into a war zone unarmed, and now she was bleeding in silence. Her phone buzzed on the table. Dozens of messages, reporters asking for a statement, friends begging for answers. Emily swiped it away, unable to face the world. Her hands shook as she lowered herself to the floor, curling against the side of the bed, tears soaking the silk of her gown. She thought of her mother. If she were alive, she would have known what to say. She would have told Emily to stand tall, to fight for her dignity. But Emily wasn't her mother. She was tired, scared, and 5 months pregnant. All she wanted was to disappear, to vanish before the humiliation consumed her completely. Minutes blurred into what felt like hours. The muffled sounds of the gala carried through the walls. Laughter, music, clinking glasses. Life outside continued, indifferent to her collapse. Finally, Emily dragged herself up, her body heavy with exhaustion. She stared once more into the mirror. This time she didn't see just a broken bride. She saw someone at a crossroads. The girl who begged for love could stay curled on the floor, but the woman carrying a child deserved more. Tears still streaked her cheeks, but her eyes sharpened. The storm inside her wasn't done, and in that quiet suite, Emily whispered a promise to herself and her unborn baby. "They will not see me fall again." The bridal suite was quiet now, broken only by the sound of Emily's uneven breaths. Her tears had dried, leaving streaks of black mascara on her pale cheeks. She sat on the floor, exhausted, her wedding gown pooling around her like a defeated soldier's armor. For a moment, she thought the world outside had forgotten her. She wished it had. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the door. Emily stiffened. She expected Adrian, his voice smooth with excuses, or Vanessa, smug and triumphant. Her chest tightened as the doorknob turned. She wanted to scream, to tell whoever it was to leave her alone. But the door creaked open, and instead of Adrian, a different figure stepped inside. It was Ethan Morgan. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that silenced rooms, Ethan was the kind of man people noticed even when he said nothing. A successful CEO in his own right, he was Adrian's business rival, though few knew the depth of their rivalry. To the public, Ethan was private, mysterious, the kind of billionaire who avoided cameras. To Emily, he was a ghost from her past. "Emily," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "You don't have to hide." Her throat tightened. "Why are you here?" she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch him destroy you. Not you. Not like this." She blinked, confused. "You knew?" "I knew enough," Ethan replied, his jaw clenched, anger flashing across his face. "Adrian's been careless. Vanessa wasn't exactly discreet. But tonight," he paused, his voice low and steady. "Tonight he went too far." Emily felt her breath catch. Someone believed her. Someone saw the truth. For hours she had carried the weight of humiliation alone. But now, standing before her, was proof that she wasn't crazy, wasn't weak. But why him? Why Ethan? As if sensing her doubt, Ethan crouched down so they were eye level. "Your mother once helped my family. Years ago, when we lost everything, she gave us a second chance. She said kindness was never wasted. I never forgot that, and I promised myself, if I could ever repay her, I would." Emily's chest tightened. Memories of her mother's generosity, her gentle voice, her quiet strength came rushing back. She had never known the full extent of her mother's kindness. But now, in the middle of her darkest night, that kindness had come back to protect her. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder. He placed it gently on the vanity. "Inside is everything you need. Proof of Adrian's betrayal. Financial fraud, backroom deals, even photos of him with Vanessa. He thinks he's untouchable. But he isn't." Emily stared at the folder, her hands trembling. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and hope. This was more than revenge. It was power. The very weapon Adrian thought she'd never have. "Why are you giving this to me?" she asked, her voice shaky. Ethan's eyes softened. "Because you deserve better, and because he should never see you as weak again." Emily swallowed hard. For the first time that night, her tears weren't from despair, but from something else. Resolve. She wasn't just a broken bride anymore. She was a woman with a choice. A woman holding evidence that could shatter Adrian's empire. Her hand hovered over the folder, and when her fingers finally touched it, she felt the weight of destiny pressing into her palms. And in that moment, Emily knew. The game had changed. Adrian wasn't the only one with power anymore. Emily sat motionless, the folder Ethan left resting on her lap like a ticking time bomb. Hours ago, she had been a trembling bride, terrified of humiliation, begging silently for love that no longer existed. Now, as she flipped through the pages, every line of evidence carved away the last remnants of her innocence. Bank transfers, secret accounts, photos of Adrian and Vanessa in private resorts, contracts signed under her name without her knowledge. It was all there. Ugly and undeniable. Adrian hadn't just betrayed her heart, he had used her, her pregnancy, even her family's connections, as pawns in his endless game of greed. The sobs that had once racked her body no longer came. Instead, a strange calmness spread through her chest, cold and sharp as steel. She rose from the floor and walked toward the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had collapsed hours earlier. The tears were gone. The makeup was smeared, yes, but her eyes burned with a new light. Determination. She slowly peeled off the ruined bridal gown. The delicate lace felt foreign now, a costume of a naive girl who thought love could protect her. Piece by piece, she shed it, leaving behind the broken bride. She slipped into a simple black dress from her suitcase, one she had packed just in case of emergencies. Tonight, it became her armor. Emily tied her hair back, exposing her face fully for the first time. She no longer wanted to hide. She wanted every camera, every guest, every whispering mouth to see her, not as Adrian's fragile fiancée, but as the woman who refused to be erased. Her hands brushed across her belly. "We're gonna be okay," she whispered to her unborn child, "because your mother isn't weak anymore." The baby shifted, and for the first time Emily felt it not as a burden, but as a source of strength. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the life inside her, for a future that Adrian didn't deserve to control. When Ethan returned an hour later, he stopped at the doorway, stunned. Gone was the shattered bride in white. Standing before him was a woman cloaked in quiet power. "You look," he began, but his words faltered. "Different?" Emily asked, her voice steady. She closed the folder and held it firmly in her hand. "I have everything I need. Now I just need the right moment." Ethan nodded slowly, admiration flickering in his eyes. "Then let's give you that moment." As they spoke, the muffled sounds of the gala still drifted through the walls. Music, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. Adrian was downstairs, basking in the illusion of victory. He had no idea that the woman he thought he broke was already preparing his downfall. Emily glanced once more at her reflection. The transformation was complete. The timid girl who begged for love was gone. In her place stood a mother, a fighter, and a strategist. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy her had instead forged her into something unbreakable. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked toward the door. Each step was a vow. She would not be silent. She would not bow. She would not let Adrian write her story. Because tonight, in front of every guest and every flashing camera, Emily Carter was no longer a victim. She was the storm. The ballroom had regained its rhythm. Guests sipped champagne, gossiping in hushed voices about the scandal that had nearly derailed the night. Adrian had smoothed over the chaos with forced laughter and empty reassurances. A misunderstanding, he called it, brushing off Vanessa's bold display as if it were nothing. The orchestra played again, though the melody felt hollow and the crowd buzzed with curiosity. Adrian believed he had regained control. He always did. His charm, his money, his name, they had gotten him out of worse situations. But as he raised his glass for yet another toast, the doors to the ballroom opened. Emily stepped inside. The room fell silent. No longer in her bridal gown, she wore a sleek black dress that clung to her frame, her hair pulled back, her face free of tears. The cameras turned instantly, bulbs flashing like lightning. She looked like a woman transformed, every step measured, every breath steady. A queen walking into her court. Adrian's smile faltered. "Emily," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "My love, there you are. Join me." But Emily didn't move toward him. Instead, she walked to the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted, whispers rising in waves. She turned slowly, letting every pair of eyes settle on her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried clear and sharp across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "thank you for being here tonight. You came to witness a wedding. Instead, you will witness the truth." A murmur rippled through the guests. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Emily, that's enough," he snapped, his voice low. She ignored him. With steady hands, she lifted the folder Ethan had given her. "This is what my fiancé has been doing behind closed doors. Fraud, lies, betrayal, and yes, an affair with the woman you all saw earlier." Gasps filled the ballroom. Cameras clicked wildly. Vanessa paled, her smirk vanishing as reporters surged forward. Emily opened the folder, pulling out photographs and documents. She held them high, passing them to the nearest journalist. "These are copies. Take them. See for yourselves." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters lunged for the papers, snapping photos of contracts, financial records, images of Adrian and Vanessa entwined in luxury hotels. Guests whispered furiously, reputations and investments unraveling with every passing second. Adrian lunged forward, his face red. "Stop this madness," he roared. "You're hysterical. She's hysterical." Emily turned to him, her eyes like steel. "No, Adrian, I'm not hysterical. I'm finished." Her words struck like a slap. The crowd fell silent again, every gaze locked on her. She placed a hand on her belly, her voice soft but unyielding. "I carried your child believing you were a man of honor. I sacrificed, I trusted, I believed. But tonight, I take back my dignity. You will never control me again." The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly applause began. It started with one guest, then another, until the entire ballroom thundered with claps. Not for Adrian, for Emily. She lifted her chin, letting the moment wash over her. This was no longer Adrian's night, it was hers. And as Adrian stood frozen in the spotlight, his empire unraveling, Emily Carter smiled, the kind of smile that promised the storm had only just begun. The ballroom was still echoing with applause when Emily lowered her hand from her belly and stood tall, letting the silence return. Every camera, every guest, every whispering mouth was fixed on her. For the first time that night, she was not the subject of pity. She was the embodiment of power. Adrian tried to speak, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won? You think anyone will believe this?" He gestured wildly toward the journalists clutching documents, toward Vanessa shrinking behind him. "They'll see you for what you are, a bitter woman with nothing." Emily's calmness cut through his outburst like a blade. "Nothing?" she repeated, her voice steady, resonant. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I have everything that matters, my child, my dignity, and the truth that's more than you will ever have." Gasps echoed again. Adrian's face flushed crimson, but the crowd no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with disgust. Investors exchanged uneasy glances. Politicians turned away. The empire he had built on charm and illusion was crumbling in front of his eyes. Emily took a deep breath, her voice softening. "To every woman in this room and to every woman watching through those cameras, I want you to hear me clearly. Do not let anyone convince you that you are weak. Do not sacrifice yourself for a man who does not value you, and never, ever let betrayal define you." Her words struck the crowd with the weight of truth. Some women nodded, others wiped away tears. Even men shifted uncomfortably, confronted by the mirror she held up to their world. She placed her hand over her belly again, this time not in sorrow, but in pride. "This child will grow up knowing that their mother chose strength over silence, dignity over shame. And I will raise them to know that love is not meant to be a cage, but a shelter. I may have walked into this night as a bride, but I will walk out as something stronger, a mother, a survivor, and a woman who will never be broken again." The applause returned, louder this time, rising like thunder. People stood from their seats, clapping, cheering, some even chanting her name. Cameras flashed in a frenzy, immortalizing her transformation. Vanessa slipped out the side door, her crimson gown a streak of shame. Adrian stood rooted, his fists clenched, his empire collapsing. For the first time in his life, he was powerless, and he knew it. Emily turned, her eyes finding Ethan across the room. He gave her a small nod, one of respect, not pity. She nodded back. Their story was not about romance, not yet. Tonight was about reclaiming her life. She walked toward the exit, each step strong, her head high. The guests parted, creating a path as if in reverence. By the time she reached the doors, she was no longer the abandoned bride of a scandalous wedding. She was the woman who turned betrayal into fire and humiliation into triumph. As the doors closed behind her, the orchestra began to play again. Not the wedding march, but a triumphant symphony, as if the universe itself honored her courage. And with that, Emily Carter left the ballroom not as a victim of Adrian Blackwell, but as a symbol for every woman who has ever been underestimated. By sunrise, the city was no longer talking about the wedding that never was. It was talking about Adrian Blackwell's fall from grace. The morning papers didn't show glossy photos of the ceremony or glowing headlines of a billionaire's fairy tale marriage. Instead, they screamed with scandal. Blackwell betrayal exposed at altar. Pregnant bride shames billionaire in front of elite crowd. Adrian Blackwell, fraud, affair, and the wedding disaster of the year. The front pages were brutal. Images of Emily standing tall in her black dress dominated every cover, her hand on her belly, her eyes burning with quiet strength. She wasn't painted as a victim, she was celebrated as a heroine. Meanwhile, Adrian's photos told another story. Shots of him lunging forward in anger, his face twisted with desperation, his hand reaching out toward Emily only to be rejected before the world. The captions mocked him, the groom who lost everything. Television anchors replayed the footage on loop. Clips of Emily's speech spread across social media. Her words translated into hashtags. Never broken, strength over silence, Emily Carter. Millions watched, millions shared, millions cheered. Overnight, she became a symbol. But for Adrian, the consequences went far beyond humiliation. By noon, stock in Blackwell Enterprises plummeted. Investors pulled out in droves, terrified of the fraud allegations Emily revealed. Contracts were canceled, partnerships dissolved. Politicians who once clung to Adrian for campaign donations suddenly distanced themselves, claiming ignorance. His phone, once buzzing with admiration, now flooded with messages of disgust. Vanessa, his mistress, disappeared into the shadows. The same woman who boldly strutted through the ballroom vanished when the world turned against them. Tabloids caught her boarding a flight to Europe, alone, her crimson gown traded for a hoodie and sunglasses. She had gambled on Adrian's power, and when it crumbled, she left him to burn alone. The board of directors at Blackwell Enterprises called an emergency meeting. For years they tolerated Adrian's arrogance because he made them rich. Now he was a liability. Within 24 hours, whispers of his removal circulated. By the end of the week, the whispers would become reality. And Emily? She stayed silent. She refused interviews, declined comment requests, avoided the paparazzi who camped outside her apartment. The world wanted her voice, but she gave them nothing. Her silence made her more powerful. She had already spoken the truth where it mattered. Before the cameras, before the crowd. There was nothing more to say. Still, behind closed doors, Emily watched the storm unfold with a quiet resolve. She didn't smile at Adrian's downfall, nor did she celebrate his ruin. She wasn't driven by vengeance anymore. She was focused on one thing, her child's future. But the city had other plans. Strangers sent her letters of support. Women shared their own stories of betrayal, and talk shows hailed her as the woman who humbled a billionaire. Whether she wanted it or not, Emily had become a symbol of resilience. Adrian, meanwhile, locked himself in his penthouse, blinds drawn, drinking heavily as the world devoured him alive. He replayed the moment of Emily's defiance again and again, each time feeling his empire slip further from his grasp. The man who once believed he was untouchable was now a pariah. And as the headlines grew harsher and the empire collapsed, one truth echoed through every newsroom and boardroom alike. Adrian Blackwell's reign was over, and it was Emily Carter who ended it. For weeks after the scandal, Emily kept her world small. She spent her mornings in a modest apartment she rented under her maiden name, away from paparazzi, away from curious neighbors. She cooked simple meals, read quietly in the mornings, and placed her hand on her belly each night, whispering promises to the life growing inside her. At first, the silence felt heavy. After years of standing in Adrian's shadow, she wasn't sure who she was without him, but slowly she began to remember. Before Adrian, Emily Carter was an artist, a designer with dreams of transforming spaces into living poetry. She had given that up when she stepped into his world. Now, with nothing left to lose, she returned to the very passion that once fueled her. She started small. One morning, she dug out her old sketchbooks from a box she'd hidden away years ago. The pages smelled of dust and forgotten dreams, but the drawings inside still carried her heart. She traced the lines with her fingers, and for the first time in months, she smiled. With the encouragement of her younger sister, Sophie, she began reaching out to old contacts. Friends who remembered her talent were eager to help. Soon, she was sketching designs for weddings, galas, and charity events. Ironically, the scandal that had humiliated her became her strongest calling card. Clients whispered, "She's the woman who stood up to Adrian Blackwell." To them, she wasn't just a designer. She was proof of strength. Within 3 months, Emily secured her first major contract, redesigning the interior of a new women's shelter funded by one of Adrian's former rivals. She poured herself into the project, working long nights despite her growing belly. She chose warm tones, soft textures, spaces that felt safe. Every stroke of her pencil was a message. You are not broken. You are home. As she worked, the baby inside her kicked more often, as if urging her forward. Each movement reminded her why she fought so hard. She was no longer building a life for Adrian's approval. She was building a legacy for her child. But rebuilding wasn't just about work. It was about herself. Emily took long walks in the park, letting the crisp autumn air fill her lungs. She enrolled in prenatal yoga, where she met other expectant mothers who reminded her that she wasn't alone. She laughed again, something she thought she had forgotten how to do. Ethan appeared occasionally, always respectful, never pushing. He would drop by with coffee, offer business advice, or simply listen when the weight of it all threatened to crush her. He admired her strength, but more than that, he respected her independence. One evening, as Emily locked up her small design studio, she noticed a group of young women waiting outside. They weren't clients. They were strangers. "We just wanted to thank you," one of them said, her voice trembling, "for showing us that we don't have to stay silent." Tears stung Emily's eyes, but this time they were tears of healing. She realized her story wasn't just her own anymore. She carried the voices of countless women who had suffered in silence. And by rebuilding her life, she gave them permission to rebuild theirs too. Emily Carter was no longer the abandoned bride. She was an artist, a businesswoman, a mother-to-be, and a survivor. And as she turned off the lights in her studio that night, she knew this was only the beginning of the empire she would build. Not from betrayal, but from strength. Adrian Blackwell was not a man used to losing. For years he had dominated boardrooms, crushed competitors, and bent people to his will with money and influence. But after Emily's public exposure, he became something he had never been before: vulnerable. His empire was collapsing. The board stripped him of his CEO title, pushing him aside as shareholders demanded accountability. His name disappeared from the glossy magazine covers that once worshipped him. Invitations to elite parties dried up. Even his so-called friends stopped answering his calls. For weeks, Adrian lived in denial. He told himself the scandal would pass, that Emily would come crawling back once she realized she couldn't survive without him. "She's just playing victim," he sneered one night, staring at his reflection in the darkened windows of his penthouse. "She'll beg to return." But she didn't. Instead, Emily's name grew brighter while his dimmed. The media celebrated her transformation, her design studio was thriving, and her story had become a beacon for women across the country. Adrian seethed as he watched clips of her cutting ribbons at charity events, her hand protectively cradling her belly. She looked happy. She looked free. That was what enraged him most, her freedom. Desperation pushed him into reckless choices. He began showing up unannounced at her apartment, pounding on the door late at night. "Emily, open up, we need to talk." His voice was raw, desperate, no longer the smooth confidence he once wielded. She never answered. Instead, Ethan's security team made sure he was escorted off the property each time. Adrian turned to the press, giving interviews filled with half-truths and fake remorse. "I made mistakes," he told one reporter, his eyes glassy. "But Emily knows I love her. I just want my family back." The public wasn't fooled. His words rang hollow. And the backlash was even harsher. Headlines mocked his pleas. Blackwell begs, world laughs. But the lowest point came when Adrian tried to use the baby against her. He filed a petition in court, demanding partial custody, claiming Emily was unfit to raise the child alone. His lawyers argued that her emotional instability made her dangerous. When Emily read the documents, her hands shook with fury. For a moment, fear gnawed at her. Fear that he might succeed, that he might take away the only light in her life. But then she straightened her shoulders. Adrian had underestimated her before. He would make the same mistake again. With Ethan's support, she assembled a legal team. She didn't fight with anger. She fought with facts. Her lawyers presented evidence of Adrian's fraud, his reckless lifestyle. His affair splashed across headlines. The judge's gavel fell swiftly, dismissing Adrian's petition with prejudice. Emily walked out of the courthouse that day with her head high, paparazzi shouting her name. Adrian trailed behind, his face red with humiliation. He had tried to weaponize her child, and he had lost. That night, Emily sat by the window of her apartment, her hand on her belly. She whispered softly, "He won't touch you. Not now. Not ever." Across the city, Adrian poured himself another glass of whiskey, drowning in bitterness. For the first time in his life, he realized the truth. Emily was no longer his to control. And the more he tried to claw his way back, the more the world turned to Emily, leaving him alone in the ruins of his own making. For weeks, Vanessa Liu had stayed out of sight. After the wedding scandal, she disappeared from the public eye, avoiding the flashing cameras and vicious headlines. She told herself it was temporary, that Adrian would clean up the mess as he always did, and then she could step back into his life once the dust settled. But this time, Adrian wasn't the untouchable titan she had fallen for. He was sinking fast, and Vanessa had no intention of going down with him. She had always been ambitious. That was why she caught Adrian's attention in the first place. Her hunger for power matched his arrogance. But while Adrian thought she loved him, Vanessa was playing her own game. She didn't want to be his mistress forever. She wanted influence, wealth, and her own seat at the table. When Adrian's empire crumbled, she saw an opportunity to trade loyalty for survival. One evening, Vanessa walked into a private restaurant downtown. Waiting for her was a man she once despised, an investor Adrian had humiliated in a deal years earlier. "You wanted proof of Adrian's corruption?" she asked, sliding a sleek flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is here." The man raised a brow. "And why would you betray him now?" Vanessa leaned back, sipping her wine with a smile. "Because the king is falling, and I don't plan to be dragged down with him." The investor chuckled. "Clever girl, but you realize once this gets out, you're finished too." Vanessa's smile faltered, just slightly. She thought she could outsmart everyone, but she hadn't calculated how much the world already despised her. To the public, she wasn't a victim, she was a willing accomplice. The scarlet woman who strutted into a billionaire's wedding wearing red and daring the world to watch. When the files she leaked hit the media, the backlash was immediate. Adrian was destroyed further, yes, but Vanessa's name was dragged through the mud alongside his. Blackwell's mistress strikes again. Vanessa Liu, from ambition to infamy. No one trusts a traitor. She tried to spin it, giving interviews where she painted herself as another pawn in Adrian's game. "I was manipulated," she said tearfully on live television. "I believed he loved me." But the crocodile tears didn't convince anyone. People remembered her smirk in the ballroom, the way she clung to Adrian's arm in front of his pregnant bride. No amount of acting could erase that image. Even her career in corporate events evaporated overnight. Clients canceled contracts. Former colleagues refused to answer her calls. She had gambled everything on Adrian's power, and now she had nothing. And Adrian? When he learned Vanessa had betrayed him, his fury was volcanic. He stormed into her apartment, demanding answers, only to find it empty. She had fled the city days earlier, leaving him to choke on the smoke of his ruined empire. But Vanessa's escape didn't save her. Paparazzi tracked her to Los Angeles, where she was caught working at a low-end PR firm, stripped of the glamour she once flaunted. The woman who had dreamed of being a queen was reduced to anonymity, her name now synonymous with betrayal. Emily read the headlines one morning and felt a strange calm. She didn't celebrate Vanessa's downfall. She didn't need to. Life had a way of exposing the truth. Vanessa had thought she could build a future on lies and ambition, but in the end, she was just another casualty of Adrian's destruction. And as Vanessa faded into obscurity, the world turned its gaze back to Emily, the woman who rose while they both fell. In the weeks that followed Vanessa's disappearance, Emily's name didn't fade from the headlines. It grew stronger. But unlike Adrian and Vanessa, her story wasn't one of scandal anymore. It was one of survival, courage, and transformation. At first, she resisted the spotlight. She turned down television interviews, ignored book deal offers, and avoided late-night hosts who begged her to share her side of the story. She wanted to live quietly, to focus on her pregnancy and her design studio. But silence couldn't shield her from the tidal wave of attention. Across the country, women wrote to her. Handwritten letters arrived in bundles. Emails flooded her inbox. Messages poured across social media. Some were from wives who had endured betrayal, others from daughters who had watched their mothers suffer in silence. You gave me the courage to leave. Because of you, I finally spoke up. You showed me I'm not alone. Emily realized something important. Her pain had given her a voice, and that voice was now theirs too. She decided to use it. It began with a single speech at a local women's shelter, where she had been volunteering quietly. Standing before a small crowd of women who carried their own scars, Emily spoke from the heart. We cannot control how others betray us, she said, her voice steady, but we can control how we rise from it. Strength doesn't mean we never break. It means we refuse to stay broken. The video went viral within hours. Millions watched, millions shared, millions cried. News outlets picked it up, calling her the voice of resilience. Invitations poured in. Conferences, charity events, empowerment summits. Emily, the once silenced bride, was now a beacon of strength. Her design studio grew alongside her influence. Clients specifically sought her out, not just for her creativity, but for what she represented. She began specializing in events that carried meaning, fundraisers for shelters, galas for education, celebrations that gave back. Each event reflected her journey. Beauty born from pain, strength carved from loss. But what surprised her most was how natural it felt. For years, Adrian had told her she was too soft, too emotional, too naive. Now those very qualities became her power. Her vulnerability made people trust her. Her authenticity drew them in. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was proving that imperfection could still shine. Her sister Sophie watched with awe. You're becoming more than a designer, Em. You're becoming a leader. Emily smiled softly, her hand resting on her belly. I'm just becoming who I was always meant to be. The media dubbed her the Unbroken Bride. It wasn't a title she asked for, but she embraced it. Not for herself, but for the women who saw their own stories in hers. One evening, as she prepared notes for a keynote speech at a women's leadership conference, Ethan stopped by her studio. You realize, he said, his tone half teasing, half admiring, you've become more powerful than Adrian ever was. And you did it without lying, without stepping on anyone. You did it just by being you. Emily looked up from her notes, her eyes clear. That's the difference, isn't it? He built an empire on fear. I'm building mine on hope. And as the applause of millions grew louder with each passing week, Emily Carter stepped fully into her new role. Not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of empowerment for a world that desperately needed her voice. Adrian Blackwell had once lived in the clouds, towering above the world on skyscraper balconies, sipping champagne worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Now he lived in shadows. The penthouse that once buzzed with parties and glittering guests was silent, its marble floors littered with empty bottles and unopened bills. The blinds stayed drawn, the city skyline hidden behind dust and darkness. The man who once commanded boardrooms now spent his mornings staring blankly at the television, watching reruns of his own downfall on news channels that never tired of replaying his humiliation. Blackwell Enterprises had cut him off completely. The board forced him out, freezing his accounts as investigators uncovered layers of fraud and manipulation. His assets were seized, his properties repossessed. Lawsuits piled higher than his bar tabs. His so-called friends vanished first. The same men who had once cheered him on the golf course now ignored his calls. The women who once clung to his arm blocked his number. Even Vanessa, the mistress he had once promised the world, betrayed him and disappeared. Adrian was left with nothing but the echo of his own arrogance. At first, he fought. He stormed into board meetings uninvited, demanding his position back. Security escorted him out. He threatened investors, but they laughed in his face. He tried to manipulate the press with crocodile tears, but every word only fueled the fire of ridicule. As weeks turned into months, his fight drained away. His hair grew unkempt, his once perfect suits replaced by wrinkled shirts. The confident smirk that had once defined him disappeared, leaving behind only bitterness. But the worst blow came when the courts officially dismissed his custody petition. He had hoped to use Emily's child as leverage, to cling to some shred of control. Instead, the judge's ruling painted him as unfit, a danger to the very family he once pretended to cherish. The news spread instantly. Blackwell declared unfit father. Court chooses Emily. The humiliation was unbearable. One night, Adrian stumbled through the streets of Manhattan, drunk and disheveled. People recognized him, but instead of admiration, their eyes held contempt. A man who had once been envied was now pitied, mocked, dismissed. He overheard whispers. "Is that really Adrian Blackwell? Hard to believe that's the billionaire. Serves him right." The words cut deeper than any lawsuit. He returned to his penthouse, sinking into the leather chair that once symbolized his power. For hours, he sat there, staring at the skyline he used to own. Now, it belonged to others. Competitors had taken his contracts, rivals claimed his influence, and Emily, stood at the center of it all, shining brighter than he ever had. Adrian clenched his fists, fury burning through his veins. "She did this," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "She ruined me." But even as he said it, a darker truth gnawed at him. Emily hadn't ruined him. He had ruined himself. His greed, his arrogance, his lies, they were the real weapons that destroyed him. For the first time in years, Adrian felt something unfamiliar. Regret. Not just for losing Emily, not just for losing power, but for realizing too late that he had traded love for ambition and ended up with nothing. The once mighty billionaire was now a ghost, wandering the ruins of his own empire. And as Emily's star continued to rise, Adrian Blackwell faced the truth that terrified him most. He was no longer feared, no longer admired, no longer relevant. He was nothing. As winter melted into spring, Emily's world shifted once more. Her belly had grown round and full, a constant reminder that every step she took, every decision she made, was no longer just for herself. The child inside her kicked with strength, as if impatient to meet the world. Each movement was a promise of new beginnings. Her days were filled with both exhaustion and hope. Mornings began with soft sunlight spilling through her apartment windows, where she sat quietly with a cup of tea, journaling her thoughts for her unborn child. One day, she wrote, "You'll read these words and know that you were the reason I stood tall when the world wanted me to fall." At her design studio, business thrived more than ever. Clients lined up not just for her creativity, but for her story. Emily poured her soul into each project, designing with themes of resilience and rebirth. The women's shelter she had decorated months earlier became a landmark of hope, and soon she was asked to design spaces for other charities across the country. But it wasn't only her career that grew. Her influence as a voice for women multiplied. She was invited to speak at universities, community centers, and conferences. Each time she stood before an audience, she placed her hand on her belly and spoke not just as a designer or a survivor, but as a mother. "Strength," she told them, "isn't measured by what we endure alone. It's measured by the love we carry forward, even when the world tries to take it from us." Her younger sister Sophie became her closest companion, attending doctor appointments, helping prepare the nursery, painting soft stars and clouds on the walls. "This baby is going to grow up surrounded by love," Sophie said one night as they arranged tiny clothes in drawers. Emily smiled, tears warming her eyes. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't frighten her. Ethan continued to hover at the edges of her life, steady and reliable. He offered help without expectation, protection without control. Though unspoken, a quiet bond grew between them. When Emily doubted herself, Ethan reminded her, "You've already done the hardest part. You survived. Now you get to live." Still, in her quiet moments, fear crept in. Would she be enough for her child? Could she truly raise them without the shadow of Adrian's betrayal haunting them? She fought those thoughts by preparing. She attended parenting classes, surrounded herself with supportive women, and leaned on her growing community. The night before her baby shower, Emily sat alone in the nursery. The crib was ready, the shelves lined with storybooks, the walls painted in soft blues and whites. She traced her fingers over the crib's edge, whispering, "You will never know the lies, only the truth. You will never see weakness, only love." Tears fell, but they were not of sorrow. They were of release. For years, she had carried pain in silence. Now she carried life, love, and legacy. And as she placed her hand over her heart and her belly, Emily Carter knew that the empire she was building wasn't made of money or power. It was made of love. And no betrayal could ever take that away. Weeks after the birth, Emily found herself transformed in more ways than she imagined. Motherhood reshaped her nights into sleepless hours, her days into tender rhythms of feeding, rocking, and whispering lullabies. Yet with every cry, every tiny grasp of her baby's fingers, she felt her heart heal. The baby became her anchor. The shadows of betrayal no longer haunted her the same way. Each time she looked into her child's eyes, she saw not the lies of Adrian Blackwell, but the truth of her own strength. "You are my second chance," she whispered during quiet nights, rocking the infant against her chest. Her healing extended beyond her home. Invitations poured in. This time, she chose carefully. Emily agreed to one national interview, not for the gossip but for the message. Sitting in a modest blue dress with her baby resting in a crib beside her, she faced the cameras. "I didn't survive because I'm extraordinary," she said gently. "I survived because I chose not to stay silent. Pain will break us, yes, but it can also shape us. And sometimes, the best revenge is not anger, it's living with dignity and peace." The audience was silent, then erupted in applause. Clips of her words spread like wildfire, reaching millions who found strength in her story. Social media turned her speech into a rallying cry. Women posted their own survival stories under the hashtag #HealingWithEmily. At her design studio, Emily continued to weave her pain into art. Every event she created carried symbolism: rebirth, light after darkness, strength through community. Clients respected her not just for her skill, but for her authenticity. She wasn't designing spaces anymore. She was creating sanctuaries of hope. Her sister Sophie often reminded her how far she had come. "Do you realize," Sophie said one evening while rocking the baby, "that people see you as more than just a survivor? They see you as proof that broken pieces can be built into something stronger." Emily smiled, her eyes misty. "I don't want to be remembered for the pain. I want to be remembered for how I rose from it." Even Ethan, who had been quietly supportive throughout, noticed the change. "You've closed the wounds," he told her one night after a charity gala. "And instead of scars, you've made art." Emily didn't reply immediately. She glanced at her sleeping baby in the stroller beside them. Then she looked back at Ethan. "I didn't heal alone. I had help. My mother's memory, my sister's love, and your faith in me. That's what carried me." Her healing was not just personal, it was public. By embracing her story, she transformed it from a wound into a weapon, from humiliation into empowerment. Adrian's betrayal no longer defined her. Her resilience did. That night, as she stood on her balcony holding her baby, the city lights flickering below, Emily felt peace. She breathed deeply, the cool air brushing her skin, the heartbeat of her child steady against her chest. For the first time since the betrayal, she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. And in that simple truth, Emily Carter finally found her freedom. Adrian Blackwell's end did not come with explosions or fireworks. It came quietly, like a flame suffocated by its own smoke. Months after Emily's rise, Adrian was a ghost in the city he once ruled. The penthouse was sold to pay off debts, his cars repossessed, his name blacklisted from the circles he once dominated. Once hailed as the golden billionaire, he was now a cautionary tale whispered at dinner tables. "Did you hear what happened to Adrian Blackwell? Betrayed his pregnant fiancée and lost everything. He wandered through bars at night, a shadow of the man who once commanded empires. People recognized him, but not with envy, only with pity. His downfall was complete, and worst of all, no one cared anymore. Emily, meanwhile, was stepping into a life brighter than she ever dreamed. Her baby thrived, growing stronger each day, their laughter filling her home with light. Her design studio expanded into a full agency, employing women who, like her, had once been underestimated. She created not just events, but opportunities, transforming pain into possibility for others. Her influence stretched beyond her work. She founded a non-profit organization for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal or abuse, offering counseling, housing support, and job training. The foundation's motto, "Never Broken," echoed the words she once whispered to herself in the darkest night. One evening, Emily attended the opening of a new shelter her foundation funded. Reporters surrounded her, snapping photos of her in a simple yet elegant gown, her baby cradled in her arms. A journalist asked, "Emily, do you ever regret what happened with Adrian?" She smiled softly, her eyes calm. "Regret? No. Without that betrayal, I would not be here. Without that pain, I would not have built this strength. I don't regret what he did. I only regret how long I believed I wasn't enough." The crowd fell silent, moved by her words. Then applause rose, loud and genuine, echoing the admiration of a world that now saw Emily not as a victim, but as a symbol. Across the city, Adrian watched the interview from a dingy hotel room. The television flickered, Emily's face glowing with pride, her baby nestled against her chest. He threw the remote at the screen, shattering the glass, but the image lingered in his mind. He had lost her forever, not just as a woman, but as the life he might have shared. Alone, he poured himself another drink. That was his legacy. Empty glasses, burned bridges, and a name that had turned to dust. Emily's future soared while his dwindled into nothingness. Back at the shelter, Emily held her baby close as the night wound down. She looked out at the crowd, survivors, supporters, women who now believed in themselves because she had dared to stand. She whispered to her child, "This is our world now, not built on lies, not on betrayal, but on truth, dignity, and love." The music swelled, laughter filled the hall, and Emily felt something she hadn't in years: complete peace. Adrian Blackwell's story had ended in ashes, but Emily Carter's story was only beginning, and it was brighter, stronger, and more beautiful than any fairy tale she had once believed in. So that's how Emily's story comes to an end, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here with me right now, it probably means something in her journey touched your heart too. Maybe it reminded you of a moment you thought you couldn't survive. Or maybe it showed you that even in betrayal, there's a way forward. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Isn't that exactly what Emily did? She couldn't control Adrian's betrayal, but she could control how she rose from it. And Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That's the heart of healing. Life will break us sometimes, but like Emily, we can choose dignity over despair, truth over lies, and love over fear. If her story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this: you are never powerless. If this touched you even a little, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel, because we'll keep bringing stories that remind you of the strength already inside you.